comes out of Mark the 11th chapter, starting with the 12th verse. And also reading down through the 14th verse, and then we'll skip over to the 20th to the 25th verse. The next day, that'll be the day after the triumphal entry, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. And seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs. Then he said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And the disciples heard him say it. Skipping on down to the 20th verse. The next day, in the morning, as they went along, they saw the fig tree withered from the roots. And Peter remembered and said to Jesus, "Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered." "Have faith in God," Jesus answered. "I tell you the truth, if anyone says to this mountain, 'Go throw yourself into the sea,' and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will happen, it will be done for him. Therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, forgive him, so that your Father in heaven may forgive your sins." You know, I can kind of sympathize with Jesus about this fig tree. As you may be aware, we're growing some plants on our balcony, including some tomato plants. One of our tomato plants has this problem of the tomatoes are producing this bottom rot on the tomatoes. And so most of them just end up getting chucked. And the ones that seem to escape this bottom rot, they're just not very flavorful. They just don't taste very good. And it's very discouraging. I have cursed that tomato plant a couple of times. And I'm getting ready to shrivel it up by the roots or something. But I can understand what Jesus is doing here. Except this story isn't really about a fig tree. The fig tree is just a visual image of what the story is about. Mark places the fig tree, the story of the fig tree, on two different sides of cleaning the temple. You see, the story is about fruitfulness. And whether we're showing we're fruitful or whether we're not showing we're fruitful. Here in the cleansing of the temple, there was lots of activity going on in that temple. There was people coming and going, and there was bustling activity. But if you remember, when we talked about it last time, there wasn't a lot of fruitfulness. There was a lot of marketing going on. Sometimes in our churches, there's a lot of activity that's going on, but not always fruitfulness going on in churches. Sometimes in our own lives, there may be lots of activity, lots of things that we are doing, but is there lots of fruitfulness in our lives? How can we avoid being a fruitless and withered fig tree? That's what we're going to look at today. And that's what Jesus concentrates on in the teaching, starting in verse 22, that we're going to look at. There's three things. There's faith, there's prayer, and then there's reconciliation. The first thing to look at is faith. In verse 22, Jesus says, "Have faith in God." Faith is important, but our faith needs to be placed in something that is worthwhile having our faith in. For example, I have faith that my car will bring me down to Bloomington. And I have faith that was certainly a much better form of transportation to go to Bloomington than walking would be, or my bicycle would be. And that's a fairly reasonable faith because I have actually taken my car to Bloomington. Other people have taken their cars to Bloomington. It's a fairly reasonable one. However, I don't have faith that my car will get me to Hawaii. You know, there's this thing in the way. It's called the Pacific Ocean. My car doesn't do very well in oceans. Not in lakes or rivers or streams either, for that matter. And so that would be a misplaced faith. Having faith in an airplane would probably be a much more wiser place to place my faith in that case. It says here we need to have faith in God. Some people place their faith in other people. Some people place their faith in money. Some people place their faith in technology. Some people place their faith in all kinds of places. Ultimately, our faith has to be placed in God. Now, don't get me wrong. Sometimes those things are good things to place our faith in, at least to a certain extent. There are people who are very trustworthy, you can count on, you can depend on. It's worthwhile to place your faith and your trust in them. Technology has certainly brought us a higher standard of living. And money certainly does help things to get things done, but all of those things will eventually fail us. If not in this life, certainly in the life to come, certainly in that transition, and at the judgment seat in this life to come. Our faith needs to be placed in God. And then Jesus goes on and says, I tell you the truth, if anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will happen, it will be done for him. In the past almost 2,000 years since that was said, I don't know of a single mountain that has ever been thrown into the sea. There's been a lot of people with a lot of great faith. And I don't think Jesus ever threw a mountain into the sea. So what does this mean? Well, we have to read this in light of verse 22. Have faith in God. Apparently God likes the mountains where they are. And he doesn't want them moved. Otherwise he would have moved them. You see, our faith needs to be placed in God, trusting that God knows what's best. Our faith, which is powerful, we do have that power at our available, but we have to trust God about what needs to be done and what doesn't need to be done. God knows more than we know. And there is no better example of our faith than Jesus Christ himself. Jesus had confidence in God's absolute rule in the world. And because of that, Jesus was never bothered by Satan or Satan's schemes. He was never wringing his hands over them. Jesus was never concerned about what the religious leaders were saying or what the political leaders were saying, because God was ultimately in charge. Jesus was able to be confident at all times, in all places. He was able to be at rest, even though he was very busy at times, because of his confidence in God. And he was able to say, pray for your enemies, love each other, because he knew God was in charge of all things, and that we could leave all things in God's hands. Do you remember Jesus in the garden at Bethany? The night before he was going to be crucified, or actually that same night he was going to be judged, and in the morning he was going to be condemned and then crucified. And he prays, he says, God, I don't want to do it this way. God, if there's any possible way this cup could pass. But then he says, not my will, but yours. He turns, when they come to arrest him, he says, didn't you know that I could call on 10 legions of angels? Jesus didn't have to go through with it, but because of his faith in God, he was willing to do so. That is our example of faith. Now, Jesus, of course, is God. And, of course, Jesus had a God-sized faith. We are humans, and we only can have a human-sized faith. But Jesus does tell us that we should take up our own cross and to follow him. And so faith starts out often with tentative steps. It's a precondition for fruit. And so we begin to take those faltering, tentative steps of faith, and as we do so, as we are encouraged, our faith becomes stronger, and so faith becomes not just only a precondition of fruit, but it also becomes the fruit itself. As we exercise our faith, we learn to grow in faith. And there's also prayer. Another precondition of faith, of fruitfulness, is prayer. Notice he goes on to say in verse 24, therefore I tell you, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. There are some people who take this verse and they say, if you really believe, really believe, then you can claim the promises of God, and you can claim it, and then you live like it, and it will happen. I know a friend many years ago, this is when we were living in Denver, and she had been heard about this. By the way, they call that sometimes the name it and claim it doctrine. She had heard about this, and after a while, she believed that God would heal her eyesight. Now, her glasses were probably thicker